Hello and welcome to the latest episode of the Dram Show with me, Chris Goodrum. Right, apologies for not doing an episode last week, but I ended up pulling a 6-day week, so there just wasn't time. But anyway, normal service is resumed today. Before we start, I've got a few bits of news. You may or may not know that earlier this week it was the final round of judging for the 2015 World Whisky Awards, and so I pootled off down to London and tasted a number of whiskies, some exceptionally good, some not quite so good. I got talking to a few people there, and it's really nice to know that you know, a lot of people, when I mention the show, go, yeah, I know about the show. Still not, of course, can't say for definite, but you know, they say, oh, I know the show, heard of the show, you know. So that's quite nice. People obviously getting to know about it, and seem to be really quite happy to, you know, send me samples. You know, whenever I sort of, with one or two exceptions, shall we say, naming no names, but you know who you are. You know, they're more than happy to sort of say, yeah, great, we'll send you some samples. You know, do a review and all that kind of stuff. And today's little tasting is no exception to that. You know. As you can see, we're looking at Benriach again. I had done an episode on the distillery some time ago. I forget exactly when, but I know I've definitely done one, so I don't need to waffle on and all that kind of stuff. But what I basically was interested in looking at was purely the peated malt that they do. Now, as you know, Speyside, or the Speyside region, you know, going back what, sort of Victorian times, pre-Victorian times, peat was the most common available fuel source. It was, you know, surrounding the distilleries. They'd go cut it, and so the style of the spirit was fairly peated. And obviously, with the advent of the railways, the cheap coal, and to a certain extent the general public's changing in palate for their blended whiskies, most of the Speyside distilleries stopped using peat and started producing the style of whisky that we know today. But Benriach appears to be one of the few that kind of stuck to its guns and sort of like carried on producing a peated malt, and now have, you know, peated malt probably beyond 25 years old, obviously, but that's the oldest bottling they do, which we'll be looking at later on. And it's a throwback malt, and you know, it's really nice to see in the fact that they kind of, you know, believed in what they were doing and hoped that the market would eventually turn around, and lo and behold it did. Now, as you know, peated malts are very, very popular. But going back to talking about the World Whisky Awards before we go any further, I'm hoping to do some kind of tie-in episode, whether it will be under the Good Dram Show banner or whether it will be purely for the World Whisky Awards. I'm hoping to do something with the winning entrants and something like that, so keep an eye out for that. Also, like I said, I was talking to a number of people who have agreed to sort of, you know, send samples and what have you. So I've got a few, I think, interesting episodes of the show in the pipeline for this year, so keep watching, and you know, hopefully you'll enjoy them. But for now, I think let's introduce this afternoon's lineup. Right, as with the last episode of the show did on Springbank, Benriach, and it's a big thank you to them, have sent me a sample of the new make peated. They haven't put on what the ABV is, but I would guess it's somewhere in mid-60s. I would have thought 65, something like that. So again, like I often say, it's nice to taste the new make spirit. Very few people ever get the opportunity outside of the distillery to do so. But like I said, it's the DNA of the whisky. It's sort of like, you know, what you get before maturation and the sort of like addition and subtraction and, you know, flavours and what have you. So really, really very interesting to look at. And I know a lot of distilleries are a bit nervous about sending out their new make to be reviewed because it's not finished, it's not the finished products. But you know, big thank you to Benriach for doing that. The next bottling we're going to be looking at is what's called Birnie Moss, which is their heavily peated no age statement whisky, bottled at 48%. Now I did taste this many years ago, and it was a bit one-dimensional. It was a bit big peat, not a great deal else. And I remember sort of thinking at the time, well, the retail price is very close, or if not the same, as the Authenticus, not the Authenticus, sorry, the Curiositas 10-year-old, which is incidentally the third bottling we'll be looking at. And I just sort of thought, well, the Curiositas has got so much more character to it, so much more depth. I think I'd rather stock that, and lo and behold, I have done ever since. So it'd be interesting to come back and taste that again, see whether that is indeed still the case with the Birnie Moss. So number 3 we'll be looking at is the Curiositas 10-year-old, bottled at 46%. The next one we'll be looking at is called Septendecim, which I probably should have looked up to see what it actually means, but I haven't. But it's a 17-year-old, and again it's peated and bottled at 46%. Enough said, really, I suppose. And finally we'll be looking at the Authenticus. Now this was released, what, 2-3 years ago now, I guess. I think when it was probably a bit more than that. I think probably 4 years ago, when it was a 21-year-old. Since now it is now a 25-year-old, and I remember tasting it when it was a 21 and thinking, damn, that's good. So 4 years, let's see what's happened to that particular spirit. So there you have it. That's this afternoon's little lineup. We'll start with the new make, and just progress up the ages and see what happens to the peat over time. Right, okay, so let's kick things off with the new make. Let's see what the nose gives us. That's got a lovely sweetness to it, actually. It's quite broad, quite rounded. Yes, there's some obvious oily, off the still kind of notes, but not as much as you would expect. I mean, there's definitely some there. The peat has got a lovely dampness to it, if that makes sense. Moist peat, sort of earthy, little bit of, it's almost violet, sort of more sort of floral violet kind of note. Again, some lovely sweet barley. It's got a very rich, very broad nose. I mean, I suppose that's not a surprise, considering the unpeated Benriach can be quite robust as far as Speyside style whiskies go. A little bit of citrus, a little bit of apricot, a little bit of sort of like those almost pineapple-y, banana-y esters. It's a lovely, complex new make spirit, and it just goes to show that obviously you have something to start off with that's got layers and layers of complexity. Add in some wood and some oxidation and maturation, and you're going to carry on just adding layers of complexity to your already relatively complex spirit. So, palate. Yep, that's quite alcoholic. Wow, lovely, earthy, rich peat finish. Oh, that's good. And no coastal notes, that dry, inland, decaying carbohydrate-y kind of peat, you know, rushes and well, less rushes, more kind of grasses, I guess, is probably. But again, it's got softness, it's got sweetness. Yes, there's some off the still notes, obviously, you would expect that. But that's a really rounded spirit, and lots and lots of peat character, but not one-dimensional. Yes, obviously the focus is more on the peat, on the palate, but yeah, that's good, like that. Right, okay, so let's move on to the Birnie Moss. As you can see, hasn't spent a huge amount of time in the cask. It's got a very, very pale hue. I mean, if you compare it to the 10-year-old, you're looking at sort of, that's obviously, I would guess, between sort of 3 and 5 years old, looking at the colour of that. So let's see what the nose gives us then. Fuller than I remember it. more herbal, manure. I remember it being quite manure-y, and this is certainly still manure-y. Excuse me. It's got a crispness to it, a little grassiness. It's got an edge, but it's a lot fuller. I mean, it's not got a huge array of fruit, but it has a depth to it. It has, you know, an underpinning to the peat. Again, not a huge amount of oak as we would have expected by the colour of it, but there's a little bit there, just a little bit of vanilla. Yeah, I like this. I mean, I don't know whether it's basically my nose changing, my sort of, you know, or whether it has actually got a little bit more going for it. It's not as humongously peated as you might expect. I mean, I'm guessing peated to around about sort of 40, 45 maybe parts per million. But it's got a softness and a robustness which I don't ever remember this bottling having. I remember the sort of the peat just being sort of, yeah, so intense that was pretty much about it. But yeah, there's a bit more going on, I think. Palate? It's a definite correlation between the new make and the Birnie Moss. Obviously, you would expect that, but it's very much like that. It's very much like new make. Again, got a nice broadness, a little bit more oak than there was evident on the nose. More milky, sort of creamy. You know, not clotted cream, but lightly creamy oak. Again, really quite round and sweet. Quite intense on the peat, most of the peat coming through sort of on the finish and lingering really, really nicely. Again, quite earthy with a little bit of a herbal kind of character, touch of manure. Does quite dry. Again, that's obviously the age and the ABV, so it is a little bit of an austere finish, but you know, really very, very enjoyable. And I think, like I said, I think considerable improvement on what it was when I tasted it last time. So yeah, pleasant. Right, okay, so on to the Curiositas. Now, this is one of those whiskies that I've tasted quite a number of times, and the oak character seems to kind of come and go on a regular basis. Sometimes I'll taste it and there'll be quite a fair amount of oak. Other times I'll taste it and there's not a great deal of oak character whatsoever. I will say the quality is always very, very good. It's certainly one of my favourite bottlings of around about the sort of my favourite peated bottlings around about the 30 odd pound mark. And but it does seem to be one that does kind of fluctuate, certainly, like I said, in its oak character. So are we going to get an oaky one, or are we not going to get an oaky one? Only one way to find out. It's quite an oaky one, but it's not OTT in the oak. Again, it's got a lovely sort of clotted cream, more clotted cream than the Birnie Moss. Lovely creaminess, some barley, some violet, softer peat. Again, slightly manure-y, dusty. You can smell the peat is starting to get a little bit older, a little bit more mellower. A little bit of meatiness coming through, a bit of bacon, a little bit of almost kind of soy saucy coated barbecue meat. That's lovely. That has got some lovely complexity to it, and like I said, I think it's just a really consistent bottling. Just this time showing a little bit more oak than times in the past when I've tasted it. So, but Yeah, I mean the thing I love about the peated Speysides and Highland malts and things like that is the fact that there's no coastal character. You go, no salt, so you're not in Islay, and it's just a nice counterpoint to. Not that I dislike the Isles, I love the Isles, but it's just nice to have a peated malt with a slightly different flavour profile, slightly different character. So anyway, palate. Again, very dusty peat finish, a bit like the Birnie Moss, but fuller, longer, obviously less alcoholic, which tends to help that. But again, kicks off quite creamy, some lovely sort of clotted cream oak, some barley, some robust spirit, gentle peat to start off with, but it builds really, really nicely, and you get this lovely, intense, dusty peat finish, which is just lingering. Again, a little bit of the oak comes back, a little bit of creaminess. That is just an all-round, absolutely lovely malt, I think. What more can you say? Okay, so moving on 7 years, we're now looking at the Septendecim. I'm sure one of you people out there will probably say Septendecim means, and you'll write it in the thing underneath the video. Anyway, so let's see what the nose gives us. Again, softer, not as much oak. So it's obviously, if you were looking at it, you're saying obviously that the oak has gone from being reactive now to sort of, you know, mellowing and being less reactive, or possibly it was just aged in less active casks. Again, some lovely dusty peat, some floral notes, a little bit of manure. Again, dry, slightly herbal peat. A little bit of a medicinal character there. You know, a little bit of iodine, some tar, but it's got a sweetness to it as well. Sort of slight sugar note. Oh, that's lovely. That has got some lovely age to it. It's mellowing wonderfully now, and you're getting that touch of sort of oxidised fruit, a little bit of pear, possibly, bit of apricot. It's almost got a brininess to it, but it's not quite brininess. It's that iodine-y note, which is kind of almost sort of saying brine. If you see what I mean, because you know a lot of the Islers tend to have both the brine, the peat, and the iodine kind of character, and it's kind of almost kind of setting that sort of like saltiness, but not quite. But lovely, absolutely gorgeous nose. Really, really like this. Touch of coffee-ish, sort of coffee licorice-ish notes coming through. Some older wood. Palate. Again, just a lovely, dry, subtle, soft, dusty peat finish. Oh, that's just lingering and lingering. Again, you can feel and taste the maturity in that spirit, but it's also sweeter as well. Like on the nose, that sugar note certainly sort of like has a kind of sugar-coated barley kind of character. Not a huge amount of oak. There is a little bit there. It's a more kind of in the background supporting oak rather than lots of vanillins, although there is a little bit. Again, very dusty, lovely balance to it. Little bit of meatiness on the finish, a little bit of licorice, some older wood. Yeah, that is very, very good. Absolutely impressive. Lovely to see how that is maturing out, and it's not lost a huge amount of its peat character. I mean, you often find with peated malts, as they get older, the peat flavours kind of drop off a bit, but there's no let up in that peat intensity. That is still, you know, obviously a little bit less intense than, say, the Birnie Moss, but yeah, that's nice. Right, okay, so, and finally on to the Authenticus 25. As you can see from the colour, some obvious sherry play here. Now it has to be said that like a number of other distilleries, Benriach seem to be very, very good when it comes to wood finishing and all that kind of stuff, and using wine casks and sherry casks and getting some lovely balance. I must admit, I don't think I've tasted one of their malts that have been either finished or vatted with other wine casks or that haven't had that balance, and there's very few distilleries that are really spot on. I mean, there are a few, but you know, Benriach is certainly amongst them. So so kind of looking forward to this, and let's see what the nose gives us. Yeah, that's nice. Getting almost tropical fruits. Certainly, as you know, as Speyside malts tend to mature, you get that lovely tropical fruit character, a little bit of coconut, apricot, mature tropical fruit. Some big chunky bourbon oak, it has to be said. There's some real big American vanillins coming through. A little bit of dried fruit, a little bit of raisin, some sultana, some prune. Mind you, with all that going on, there's not a huge amount of peat now. It's very, very light. Just a whiff. But yeah, that's a lot of oak. Yeah, it's really well balanced. Like I said, you're getting. Still got some spirit character. There's plenty of American oak, some Bourbony notes. There's big, chunky Bourbony oaks. There's some lovely sherry notes coming through. That sort of dried fruit and richness. Oh, that's balanced. That's lovely. There's a little bit of a floral note coming out now. A little bit of honey. Some dusty old American oak now coming through. So. Yeah, you've gone beyond the sort of the big vanilla-y Bourbony oak, and now you're starting to get that dusty, mature oak notes coming through. Oh, that is absolutely gorgeous. Lovely sweetness to it. Bit more peat smoke coming through now, as you give it some time in the glass, and certainly it's less intense than the previous couple of bottlings, but yep, it's still there. It still says hello, I'm a peated malt, but a gorgeously mature peated malt. Palate. Again, wonderful peat finish, very soft, very subtle now, more smoke, but there's a little bit of a gritty peatness just there right on the finish. Probably a little bit more sherry on the palate, a little bit more of the dried fruits, the mature sort of prunes, the licorice like treacle, toffee. Little bit of American oak coming through, just a little bit, just sort of adding another level to the flavours. Quite dry, but it's got that kind of linger. It's the tropical fruit is definitely lingering, and it's a dried tropical fruit, not sort of fresh and lush, but dried coconut, little bits of that apricot, you know, that which you get in that tropical mix. Bit crystalline, little bit of honey, and the peat just sort of gently wafts through on the finish, and that is absolutely stunning. Yeah, very good. Right, okay, so let's sum this little tasting up. Well, I think it's been really interesting. I think we started off with the new make, and we could see that the spirit itself had a lovely, broad, robust character, quite intensely peated, but not one-dimensional. Moving on to the Birnie Moss, again, very similar flavour profile to the new make, with just that smidge of oak coming through. So you can start to see the progression. You get into the 10-year-old, and obviously you're getting more of the milky, oaky character coming through. But again, the peat is certainly standing up to it, and it has the balance. Excuse me, it's coming back. Montezuma's Revenge, or whatever you want to call it. You get to the 17, and likewise you're seeing the progression, the more mature elements coming through, the dustiness, the peat is starting to drop off a little bit, but still has an absolutely gorgeous intensity to it. And then finally you get to the 25-year-old, and the peat is just you know, not hanging on it by its fingernails, but it's just a gentle waft of peat smoke, and certainly the other elements, mainly the different casks, have kind of overtaken it with regards to the intensity of flavours, but it's just so supremely balanced. Lovely maturity to the spirit, showing that sort of lovely tropical fruit kind of character that you get with older Speysides. Added in some chunky American oaks, some dusty American oaks, some subtle sherry notes. Yeah, just amazingly complex. Very nice malt, and definitely worth checking out if that's the sort of thing that appeals to you. So there you have it. That's this week's episode of the show in the bag, as they say. I hope you've enjoyed it, and I look forward to seeing you again next week. So until then, good afternoon and good granny.